In this learning objective, we're going to compute the direct materials price and quantity variances and explain their significance. Recall when we prepared our performance budget report, we calculated a spending variance, which was the difference for direct materials between our actual results of $78,000 and our flexible budget amount of $72,000. Recall the $78,000 was what it actually cost us to produce 9,000 units, and the $72,000 was what it should have cost us to produce the 9,000 units. That was the 9,000 units times a direct material cost of $8 per unit. And we ended up with a $6,000 unfavorable spending variance. In this learning objective, we're going to try to break down that $6,000 unfavorable spending variance into two components. We're going to break it down into a price variance and a quantity variance. The price variance is the difference between the actual price we paid for our direct materials and the standard price we should have paid for our direct materials, while the quantity variance is the difference between the actual quantity of direct materials we used versus the standard quantity. In terms of vocabulary and setup, notice we are now going to call our flexible budget amounts standard quantities and standard prices, or standards. Again, standards are just what we budgeted on a per unit basis. In calculating the difference between our actual results of $78,000 and our flexible budget amount of $72,000, we're going to do a little bit of a flip. Notice we're putting the actual amounts on the left-hand side now and our flexible budget amount, or standard amounts, on the right-hand side. Our calculations are rather straightforward. The actual quantities will be the actual amount of direct materials we actually used during the period in production. Our standard quantity, on the other hand, is the amount that we should have used or would have been allowed during the period. Our actual price is what we actually paid for our direct material inputs, while the standard is what we should have or expected to pay during the period. So we're going to explain the difference between our flexible budget amount of $72,000, which would have been, again, we're calling that now a standard cost, and our $78,000 actual cost. Our standard cost, our $72,000, would have come from, we produced 9,000 units. 9,000 units at $8 per unit would give us $72,000. Or we could take 9,000 units times 4 pounds, means we are going to use 36,000 pounds of materials at $2 a pound, would give us $72,000 for a standard cost. So now let's go ahead and calculate our center column, which again was our actual quantity times our standard price. And we see that center column is $79,200. We can now calculate our price variance. Our price variance is the difference between our actual and our center column. So we have a price variance of $1,200. It will be an unfavorable variance because notice the actual price we paid of $2.20 per pound is more than the standard price of $2 per pound. Our efficiency or quantity variance is $7,200. Again, the difference between the two columns. And it would be a favorable variance. And we have a favorable variance because we actually used 35,455 pounds, where at standard we would have expected to use 36,000 pounds. Finally, notice that a $7,200 favorable quantity variance combined with a $1,200 unfavorable price variance totals to our $6,000 unfavorable spending variance, which is what we wanted to explain. That, again, was the unfavorable spending variance from our performance report. Let's take a look now at another example. Bandar Industries manufactures football helmets for the North America market. In the most recent quarter, the company manufactured 35,000 helmets using 22,500 kilograms of plastic. The plastic cost the company $171,000. According to the standard cost card, each helmet should require 0.6 kilograms of plastic at a cost of $8 per kilogram. Calculate the total direct material variance and break down the variance into price and quantity variances. Let's begin by calculating the standard quantity allowed, or how many kilograms should it have taken us to make the 35,000 helmets. 35,000 helmets times 0.6 kilograms per helmet gives us a total quantity, standard quantity allowed, of 21,000 kilograms. We multiply that standard quantity by our standard price of $8 per kilogram, and we get a total standard cost of $168,000. If we compare that to our actual cost of $171,000, we see we have a $3,000 variance. And since our actual cost was greater than our standard cost, our variance is an unfavorable variance. Let's go ahead now and break that down into two components, a price variance and a quantity variance. To do that, we need to calculate our center column. We take our actual quantity of 22,500, multiply it by the $8 standard price, and we get a total of $180,000. We can now go ahead and calculate our price variance. But before doing that, let's calculate our actual cost per pound or kilogram. We do that by taking our $171,000 total cost, dividing it by the 22,500 kilograms, and we get an actual price that we paid of $7.60 per kilogram. Now our price variance will be $9,000. That's the difference between the 180 and the 171,000. And we can tell our variance will be favorable since the actual price we paid of $7.60 is less than our standard price of $8 per kilogram. Our quantity variance is the difference between the 180 and the 168,000. It's $12,000, and again, by convention, we show our variances as positive amounts. In this case, though, we know the variance is unfavorable because we actually used 22,500 kilograms, which was greater than what we should have used, our standard quantity of 21,000. If we combine our $9,000 favorable price variance with our $12,000 unfavorable quantity variance, we get our $3,000 unfavorable total variance. The last thing we want to do is examine or perhaps look at a relationship between our unfavorable quantity variance and our favorable price variance. We will typically hold our production manager responsible for material quantity variances, since the production manager supervises and is responsible for the amount of materials we use, while the purchasing manager will be responsible for price variances. This can lead to an interesting dynamic. Our production manager might claim that he's not responsible for the unfavorable material quantity variance because the purchasing manager purchased poor quality raw materials, which resulted in a great deal more scrap or waste than would have been expected. On the other hand, a purchasing manager might blame the production manager for unfavorable price variances because last-minute orders require paying expedited shipping costs or don't allow the purchasing manager to shop around for the best prices. An important point to keep in mind is that variances don't necessarily give us answers, but they allow us or point us in the right direction for asking questions.